And we're live again at JOLT 2018. I apologize for the technical difficulties. And I apologize for interrupting our on-site guests who are telling us about their plenary talks. Would you like to return to those topics?
Sure.
Oh, I should start. My talk was this morning, and it was about building learner resilience and looking really at learners through a positive light of building their resilience to become proficient learners and feel confidence in their ability to learn a second language or English as a foreign language.
So I want to ask a question because so far I heard the word resilience a couple of times, and it's one of those terms that to me is contentious when we're talking about equity and inclusion because it assumes a lot on the learner, and I'm sure that's not only what you guys are talking about. So I'd like to know more about what you were talking about in terms of resilience, both Naomi and Julie, and what do you mean by the I can, I have, I am, and that kind of thing.
The I can, I have, I am is based on a project that was done in the late 1990s by a researcher named Edith Gottberg, and it is not based on the learner totally to build resilience. And yes, you're right. One of the things I actually didn't mention was there's been a recent New York Times article about the overuse of the term resilience, and in every, including sports and other things that have nothing to do with education. But the idea is that the students and the teachers, according to Gottberg's theory, is that the students and the teachers work together to build a pattern of resilience through a model that includes what the students have as that they can depend on who I am and what I have and who I can reach out to help me support my learning. And so the negotiates that with the students to help them lead them in the right direction, to use those resources from where they are right now and where they can be in the future. And basically what I did was I took the basic of Gottberg's talk and her papers on I have, I am, I can, and she's spoken a lot in the late 1990s and the early 200s about it. And it's been picked up in ESL as, and not so much in EFL yet, but in ESL as working with the learner to build their confidence as a learner and not dependent on the learner alone to do that.
Okay, I like that. Thanks for contextualizing that and the role of the teacher in helping the learner. But what about systemic issues? Like, does it take account of the macro structures and other issues in like the way schooling is organized or just general power structures of the English language, for example, or things like that outside of just the learner-teacher classroom relationship? And also the relationships among students and how that might affect things.
Yeah, I think it takes into consideration the pieces of learners among other students in the sense of the outreach that you have for support as a learner, whether it's your teachers or other learners or your school or your family, or outside support through a caring community member. It doesn't look at the structures of how a school is organized. It really is the focus on the learner and what the learner can reach out to help. The I am is to really look inward on who you are and what you have brought to your learning. And so the can is really the piece of looking in the community around you who you can reach out to for help. I'm not sure that it looks at the organization of a school, although if you go on an extension of this, you can then look at how a school can organize itself to actually help build resilience among the learners. So it's really starting at a smaller, more intimate level than what you're thinking of at this point.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My name,
Go.
So my name, I think I got cut off on the last introduction. My name is Lindsey Kleinfeld, and I am a textbook writer from Canada, but I'm based in Spain. My talk was on diversity and inclusion, the problems, difficulties, challenges of that in terms of ELT materials, specifically in my case, course textbooks, textbooks for a global market. And so I was problematizing or looking more at the kind of what we mean by diversity and inclusion, and in a broader aspect of how that connects to the idea of the real world and authenticity in language teaching materials.
So, could you tell us a little more?
Yeah, a little more. Okay. All right. So I whet the appetite. All right. So I think we can. My point was that we can look at any talk about diversity or inclusion when we're talking about materials often runs into the idea of representing the real world in language teaching materials, and this then opens up a whole bunch of challenges that materials have always had in terms of representing the real world. Like ELT materials have often been criticized for being unreal, like unreal situations or unreal people or not authentic. There's been a big drive over the past 10, 15 years from major publishers to really sell the material as like, this is real English, or this is for real life, or this is English for the real world. And what do we mean by that? So I wanted to unpack some of the things that are often meant by that in the marketing, for example, of ELT textbooks on a global level. So what is meant by that? We could start off by real world English. Well, what do we mean by that? Do we mean real world English, like whose English is being spoken? Is it American English and British English? Is it what
Australian English?
Australian English? Is it just BANA English? Britain, Australia, North America? What about other varieties of English? So we looked at like the challenges of including different varieties of English, also dialects, and also non-standard but real forms that maybe teachers might not want to teach, sort of stuff that we're seeing on the internet. I gave some examples. So the kind of English that we teach is one area of diversity that runs into difficulties. The second thing was then diversity of our tasks that we give students. So lots has been written about the tasks that are given to students, often casting the student in the role of a consumer. So in a service encounter, let's say shopping, in many textbooks, the student is normally assumed to be the person buying, the person traveling, the person with the money, the person who is going to take a product back to exchange it, to ask to complain perhaps, all kinds of things, and not always in the other position of the person.
Oh my God, that is excellent. I mean, as someone who lives in a tourist country, usually people learn a foreign language so people are usually selling actually or giving a service. Yeah. That's a great idea. That's a great point. I have never seen a language textbook that does the opposite.
There was one, in fact, that was written for Brazil during the World Cup and Olympics. And it's the only one that I saw, and it was called Encounters. And it was really interesting because it was only about, it was commissioned by the Brazilian government, I think, to, so that people, because they knew that all these people were going to be receiving tourists from all over the world. And so they wanted to have a syllabus for people there who just needed enough English to get through that encounter.
So I have to go really soon, but I wanted to leave you with a question so that I could listen to the answer later on the recording.
Yeah, you asked for it online, because that's a different
topic. So my question was, if you're looking at open textbooks using multimodal aspects, for example, we're using Pressbooks, we're looking at Pressbooks and integrating H5P elements into the open textbook. And so I was just interested. I'm actually going to go now, but it's been lovely to meet you, and I'm really glad that I've hooked into your conference. But I'll listen to your answer if you could explain maybe some of those aspects of multimodality and how that impacts inclusion. Thanks.
Okay. Bye. So to finish, so there was diversity of English, diversity of tasks that we asked the students to do, and then finally the one that is most written about or criticized is diversity of culture, characters, people, photos, and topics. So talking about topics that don't make it into ELT course books for a variety of reasons, and whether or not they should or shouldn't be, how ELT textbooks avoid anything that could be too controversial, anything that could jeopardize sales in one market or another, anything that could be could make teachers uncomfortable, and so on and so forth. So these, and then finally things like looking at the implicit bias that the author might have on when you choose to do pictures of professions. Do you make the pilot a woman or a man? Do you make the doctor a man or a woman? Are they all white? Are there different races in the photos? Is it, if you have multiracial pictures, does it look tokenistic? These are all the kinds of problems that end up happening. Holidays are another issue. Anyway, the open source HTML multimodality I can come to in a moment. I'll let someone else speak. So here we go.
Naomi, can we hear from you? We haven't heard a lot from you.
I'm teaching English in a Japanese university, Okayama University. And so as vice president, I don't really get so much of a chance to go to any presentations. I go to a lot of business meetings, but I did get to go to one this morning, which was a presentation about multilingualism in Japan, which intrigued me because living in Japan, people think, oh, there's only Japanese and English, but this presenter was listing all something like 9 different languages that are used in Japan, and it was very, very interesting, and she was giving ideas on how we can teach the students, because in Japan, Japanese students just think it's Japanese or English. So that was an eye-opener for me.
That's terrific. Perhaps from the organization's point of view, this seems to me to be a rather bold choice for a conference theme, and a very important one. And I was wondering if there's anything that you might be able to say about how the organization is thinking about these issues of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, sure. That's a very good question, because when they chose the theme of the conference, I was really excited. And then I decided to read more. And then I realized that these terms can get like kind of buzzwordy, right? And then especially Maha's blog post was really eye-opening. So to me, inclusion is not a term that I really like to use. I prefer something like representation. You know what I mean? Because no one here says to me, oh, Patty, so we're so happy to have you here. We included you. You know what I mean? It's because the perspective is from the dominant culture, or I don't know how to describe, but it's something that's not my term. So that's why when I listened to Lindsey, I was nodding all the time. Yeah, I really enjoyed your talk, because now I have a kind of critical attitude toward these terms. And when I listened to Judy, I cried all the time. So I really enjoyed. Yeah, that was, I could feel that there's a sense of like criticality in there. So that's why I really enjoyed. And I can tell you that these terms were not the buzzwords. I can say that. And regarding your question, sorry, we have recently, because I talked to one of the 6 special interest groups that we have in JOLT, GALE, which stands for Gender Awareness and Language Education. I talked to a lot of people there, because sometimes our sessions, you know, they're not gender balanced. So we have this problem in JOLT. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And then I talked to them. And then finally, our president, he suggested that we can have working groups. And now we have one working group specifically for diversity and inclusion. And we really want to have more local teachers, Japanese teachers, from different levels. For example, school teachers, ALT, their assistants here in Japan. And then not just university instructors. So diversity has like different layers, right? And of course, they want to have different ethnic backgrounds, language backgrounds, all these. But you know, all of us are different, and we can add our voice to the organization. And I think being aware, and as Maha wrote, it needs hard work. So we're working hard to make JOLT more diverse and inclusive.
But I think it takes time to
Definitely.
Step-by-step kind of
That's
thing.
right. You need to be patient. It can't happen overnight.
That's fascinating. Thank you so very much. And it's an interesting way maybe to tie together the threads of the two talks that we're talking both about this question of what do you represent, and then how do you work with learners to develop their own self-representation. Have I got that right? I'm close?
Yes. Very, very elegant.
You got us all thinking at the same time about what you just said and responding.
Great. I would love to hear more about what you're working on or what you're seeing at the conference or looking forward to at the conference. I also want to be mindful of your time, which you're sharing with us so nicely. I wonder if you've got any other reflections about what's going on at the conference.
Well, there was the question about the online courses and diversity, or I think what that question was about. And I didn't address this in the plenary, but I think that's about how using online courses or using courses with multimodality, so you can have video and audio and things like that. It links into something that Diane Larson-Freeman mentioned in her plenary, which was design learning, where she talked about it in the sense of architecture, where by designing for example, this was an example she gave of a building that was designed for deaf people, improves the building for everybody. By including those people who are hearing impaired, improved the building for everyone. And I think this is something learning by design learning also translates into online courses. So if you think about people with dyslexia, for example, you then start varying the ways that you deliver the information, so it's not all just walls of text, or it's not all just video. You sort of have you have different ways of accessing the task. So the task may have the instructions written out, but it may also have a little video of the person reading the instructions, or there may be a play so they can hear the instructions with subtitles or things like that. I'm not sure if that's what the question was about, but I know that that is what's happening in online courses I've been designing.
Can I ask a question? Because with language learning specifically,
yep.
Some of these accommodations could hinder your learning, right? So if you want people to become fluent at listening to English without subtitles, something like subtitles, which are useful for people who are hard of hearing, would be like crutches for people who are. So do you then give instructions to people who have good hearing not to use them? I can't hear anything that Lindsey's saying.
I muted you and cannot figure out how to unmute you. I'm sorry. We were getting a lot of feedback from the room. But I am... Hey, Parisa? Could you check and whether you can unmute your microphone? Because we were getting a lot of feedback and I muted you, and I think... but I do not see an option to unmute.
Oh.
There you are. I can hear you now. Sorry.
Yep.
Okay.
Excellent.
We're back.
Yes.
We're back. So just to wrap up, and then you wanted to say something about this as well. The courses that we were looking at, I think I was looking at, were teacher development courses, not language learning courses. So that would be an issue. But anyway, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, and I think I'm thinking of the learner, and advocacy for the learner for me is a really important piece. And I don't like to think about the fact that for a listening activity, if there's text for somebody to read, that becomes a crutch for the learner. I think that I think a lot about the learner with a disability, and the learner needs to get what he needs to learn, not what the overall learners need together. So each learner needs to have something diverse in terms of his needs, and it needs to accommodate his needs. So to indicate that the text at the bottom for a listening activity that might be a crutch may not be a crutch for every learner. It depends on meeting the learner's needs, and that worries me. And I think that was part of, how do you build up the learner unless you provide him with the types of learning he needs to succeed? If you provide him with what everybody else needs to succeed, this generalistic point of view, then you're not addressing the needs of the learner, and that concerns me.
That's a great point. So you mean not just learners with disabilities, but some other learners will need that for a while. Thank you.
Right. And yeah, learners need different things at different points of learning. The big issue is, when do you pull the scaffold? If you leave the scaffold there forever, the learner stays at this level and never grows. But if you figure out a way and you tune into your learner and you say, I can remove some of these scaffolds now, but still keep others, the learner continues to learn.
Thank you.
And so,
sounds great.
The baby in the bathwater, throw everything out because this is the time to do it. But it's and it's a very hard go. And that's what makes teaching English to diverse learners so it's a lot of fun. It's very challenging. But meeting the needs of the learner, to me, is the most important piece.
And that's where, ideally, these principles of universal design for learning should enable, ideally, interesting conversations between faculty members and students to figure out, what do you need? What can you avail yourself of? I'm acquainted with a story at a peer institution where they started doing recorded lectures for a student with some kind of illness, or I think it may have been an injury, because it kind of started just as a quick accommodation for a student who couldn't make it to lectures. They put them on their learning management system and found they were also being used to a significant extent by students for whom English was a second language. And for those students, not having to take notes real time in something that was not their native language appeared to be a significant benefit. Now, this wasn't, they were making use of a resource. That's what we can say. It wasn't a controlled study in any way. But I think that's where that interesting principle comes of, what can you provide, and then how can you get people through that choice making part, so that they know that, both that they know that there are resources and that they are making progress.
Right, absolutely.
Okay.
Joe, Jason.
Yes, Jason.
Also, yes. Oh. Yeah, please tell us.
About what?
About Jew eternity sessions. About the vibe.
Yeah, well, I guess just a word on diversity and inclusion. It kind of got me thinking today about some researchers from South America, Maturana and Varla.
Jason, could you lean forward so we can hear you? Because I think you're talking to Parisa, not us, so we can hear you.
Sorry, yeah. There was a great quote from these two researchers that, like, you don't have to accept others' opinions as fact, as truth, which is kind of personal, but you have to accept their opinions as equally valid as your own. And so I think the idea of inclusion, it just gives you that opportunity to have more things and see how different cultures and different people from different backgrounds really see the world differently. And and then just respect that as equally, as different but equally valid.
Cool. Thank you very much. Do you have any other thoughts or reflections or upcoming work that you'd like to give a plug?
No, actually, I'm working with a colleague on looking at refugees and students with interrupted formal education, and going beyond what we wrote about 2 years ago about working with these kinds of newcomers. And we're looking at going from the theoretical and building background into the practical. We haven't totally started writing it. I'm still doing research. She's written an introduction to what we want to do. And we're working on a session for TESOL in Atlanta in March, a full day of working with teachers on newcomers with interrupted formal education. So that's my current passion of work.
Wow. That's tremendous.
Sure. Okay. The other thing that I was talking about here was, okay, completely different, nothing to do with the theme of the conference, but I was talking about other recent, more alternative types of material that I had been creating, including a functional language course called English for the Zombie Apocalypse, which was a series of functional language lessons. So meeting people, asking for directions, saying sorry, but instead of it being in a traditional setting you'd expect, we dropped the setting into the zombie apocalypse. So you meet other survivors, you ask for directions out of the ruined city, you scavenge for food, you don't shop. And so the language is all your basic functional language, but the style of the book is also very traditional methodology. We envisaged this as being like if this had happened, it would be the military who would be dropping these booklets all over the place. So it would be very no task-based learning, no communicate. It would be audiolingual, like just learn the phrases. So it's kind of in a mock way. It's sort of like a mock funny book with there is communicative outcomes in it. But that was a thing that I've been also talking about.
Actually, we shared this on our social media.
Okay.
Because we designed a series to get to know more about our favorite speakers.
Okay.
And then we received a kind of interesting comment. One of our followers said that, yeah, it's really useful because a lot of aliens are coming. They're like,
Oh, no.
so yeah, it's really useful. So that was something that I wanted to share.
What I had done, it was more like it was kind of like more kind of accessing the geek culture side of all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I've been very interested in doing things like that with teenagers and young adults, as well as not the main course, but as like a last 5-minute activity and throughout the semester.
It seems so fun. Yeah, and it gets a lot of attention. Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
Well, thank you all so very much. If that's sounds like that's a good place for us to let you get back to your conference. It was great to meet you, and thank you for sharing some time with us. Thank you for bearing through some technical difficulties, and I'm going to stop the broadcast on purpose.
Thank you very much. Bye. Bye.